Not every child has what it takes. That's what my father said in a room full of people under a spotlight meant to honor a lifetime of achievement. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. I heard everything in what he left out. To the world, Charles Lawson was a visionary, head of biomedical engineering at Clarion Tech, a pioneer in neural interfaces, a man whose handshake opened doors and whose approval came wrapped in gravitas. But to me, he was just the man who made me feel small. Not with cruelty, but with precision, with silence, with absence. I'm Ava Lawson, 36, lead systems analyst at BioCore Dynamics. I design systems that help paralyzed patients walk again, help amputees feel again. I've published research, secured patents, spoken at global summits. But next to my father, all of it felt like whispers against the roar of his legacy. The invitation came on a Tuesday, thick, gold-embossed cardstock. A celebration of legacy, Dr. Charles Lawson's retirement gala. Black tie, formal remarks encouraged. I stared at it for an hour, then another. I almost didn't go. Almost. But that word, legacy, kept circling in my head like a dare. His version of the story would fill that ballroom, and some part of me, some defiant, unfinished part, needed to be there to remember my own. So I circled the date, June 12th, and started planning a quiet little surprise. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. Tree-lined streets, 2-car garages, and quiet pressure that settled into your bones before you could name it. My family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Inside, it was all about performance. Expectations weren't spoken, they were assumed. I was the youngest of 3, 2 older brothers, Derek and Ben. Classic Midwestern sons. Derek was a varsity quarterback who joined the Marines right out of high school. Ben followed our father into biomedical sciences and ended up managing clinical trials by the time he was 30. My father introduced them with pride, like polished trophies he'd earned through discipline and design. And then there was me. I loved biology, but not in the way my dad respected. I was the girl who dissected flower petals and sketched neurons in the margins of my notebooks. I devoured science books, created makeshift lab setups in the garage, and memorized parts of the brain by the time I was 10. But that didn't fit the Lawson mold, strong, stoic, traditional. My mother tried to bridge the gap. She made space for me in the quiet ways, saving magazine articles about women in science, sitting through my science fair rehearsals, on slipping extra encouragement into my lunchbox notes. But she never contradicted him, not openly. I think she feared making things worse. At dinner parties, Dad would beam talking about Derek's tactical leadership or Ben's breakthrough in pharmacokinetics. Then he'd glance at me with that same expression he used for underperforming interns. Ava's very creative, he'd say, like it was an affliction. I remember once I brought home first place in a statewide biology competition. I was 14. I handed him the ribbon, buzzing with pride. He barely looked up from his laptop. "That's nice," he said. "But it's not like winning at nationals." That moment stuck with me, the way he didn't even pretend to be impressed. It taught me something I never unlearned. In his world, excellence only counted if it came packaged in the shape he approved. Still, I chased it. Approval, recognition, acknowledgement. Like maybe if I became undeniable enough, I'd finally hear him say the words I craved. "I'm proud of you." But the older I got, the more invisible I became. And invisibility is a strange thing. You get so used to not being seen, you start wondering if you're even real outside of your accomplishments. I moved out at 17 for college, graduated with honors, and kept moving forward. But that hollow space he carved in me, it followed. It whispered every time I reached a milestone. Still not enough. By the time I was in my 30s, I'd learned how to celebrate myself. But part of me still wondered, what would it feel like to finally be seen by the one man I had spent a lifetime trying to impress? After high school, I attended Northwestern on a partial scholarship. To make up the difference, I worked weekends in a campus lab and picked up night shifts at a diner 2 blocks off campus. Sleep was a luxury, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. I graduated magna cum laude in biomedical engineering. The day of the ceremony, my advisor pulled me aside and told me I had the kind of mind that could reshape the field. I nodded and smiled, then walked off stage and checked my phone. No message from my dad, not even a congrats, just one from my mom. Your father had a meeting, but we're proud of you. We. As if that softened it. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I earned a place in a competitive fellowship at MIT focusing on neural mapping and prosthetic feedback loops. By the time I was 27, I was consulting for government research contracts. At 29, I joined BioCore Dynamics. At 32, I was leading a team of 20 engineers and overseeing 3 multi-million-dollar product lines. I had a key card with clearance most people only dreamed of and a desk overlooking the Boston skyline. But at every family gathering, my father still toasted Derek's promotion to major or Ben's latest conference in Zurich. When someone asked what I was doing, Dad would say, "Oh, Ava's still with that tech group, doing good work, I'm sure." He never asked for details, never invited discussion. I think he liked the mystery. It let him dismiss it without risking being impressed. Once, I tried to break through. We were sitting in his study after a Thanksgiving dinner, just the 2 of us. I told him I'd just received a patent for a non-invasive neural mesh system that could allow amputees to feel heat and pressure again. I waited for his reaction, bracing myself for a question, a comment, maybe even a rare compliment. He just nodded. "That's interesting," he said, then pivoted to talk about Derek's new deployment schedule. I stopped bringing up my work after that. Still, I kept his photo on my bookshelf, an old one from when he first joined Clarion Tech. Clean-cut, confident, standing beside a company logo with his arm crossed like a magazine cover. I used to think I kept it there for motivation, but later I realized it was just a reminder, a symbol of who I was still trying to reach. Each year, my list of achievements grew: promotions, publications, team expansions, speaking invitations. But the silence from him remained absolute. It was like yelling into a canyon and hearing no echo. Until that gala invitation arrived, sitting pristine on my kitchen counter, daring me to show up one more time. Not as a daughter desperate to be seen, but maybe, finally, as a woman done waiting. The week before the gala, I barely slept. Every night, I stood in front of my mirror, dress zipped halfway, speech cards in hand, rehearsing lines I didn't believe in. Congratulations on an incredible career. Your dedication inspired us all. It felt like plagiarism, borrowing sincerity I didn't feel for a man who never once offered it back. The gifts sat untouched on my dresser, a small, square box wrapped in navy paper with a gray satin ribbon. Elegant, understated. Inside was something simple, something old. I had chosen it weeks before, not knowing if I'd have the nerve to hand it to him. A dozen times I told myself not to go. Told myself I didn't need to prove anything. But that small flicker inside me, the one that had never quite gone out, whispered, "Maybe this time. Maybe this time he'll acknowledge more than just his reflection." The day before the gala, my mom called. Her voice was careful, like she was walking on eggshells she'd spent years laying. "It would mean a lot if you came," she said. "He might surprise you." I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't looking for surprises anymore. I was looking for closure. I booked a train to Chicago. Told no one I was coming except my assistant, who covered my Friday meetings. I packed one dress, one pair of heels, and the box. That night, I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, fingers tracing the ribbon. I didn't know yet what I'd say, or if I'd say anything at all. But I knew one thing: if this man was going to stand on a stage and tell the world his version of the past, I needed to be in the room. Not to challenge it, not even to fix it. just to witness it, so I could finally stop chasing the ending I never got. I arrived at the Hotel Morton 20 minutes early, not out of eagerness, but because anxiety makes me overcompensate. The valet reached for my keys, my electric sedan not flashy by Boston standards, but loud in my father's world. I hesitated, then handed them over without a word. Inside, the ballroom was soaked in opulence, floor-length tablecloths, flickering votive candles, floral towers that blocked conversation. A looped slideshow played on the screen behind the stage. Dad, in crisp lab coats, shaking hands with governors, standing beside state-of-the-art equipment. Not a single family photo. I stood at the edge, scanning. My mother spotted me first. She smiled tightly and gave the smallest wave. Support from the sidelines, as always. Derek and Ben were already there, deep in conversation with a circle of executives. When Derek noticed me, his grin spread like a reflex. "Ava," he said, drawing me into a half-hearted hug. "Didn't think you'd show." "Still doing the biotech thing?" Ben asked, already turning back to his scotch. "Still at Biocore," I said evenly. "Just submitted our 4th device for FDA review." Derek nodded as if I'd said I bought new shoes. "That's great," he said, already glancing away. The room buzzed with introductions and laughter. I stayed on the perimeter, clutching my glass of sparkling water like armor. My father moved through the crowd like a senator, shaking hands, slapping backs. He greeted Derek with a clap on the shoulder and gave Ben a nod of approval. When his eyes skimmed over me, there was no flicker, no recognition. The event organizer called for everyone to take their seats. I moved toward the back, slipping into a chair near an exit, easy escape. Just in case. The lights dimmed. A woman from Clarion Tech stepped up to the mic. "Tonight," she said, "we honor a legend. A man whose name is synonymous with innovation and impact." The crowd applauded. I didn't move. Then came the main event. "Please welcome Dr. Charles Lawson." He stepped onto the stage, waving modestly, perfectly timed. He stood tall, his deep navy suit fitted like armor. The room quieted. "Thank you," he began. 43 years, a lifetime. And I've been blessed beyond measure with a brilliant career, extraordinary colleagues, and most of all, a family that has supported me through every step. My spine straightened. He continued, "My sons, Derek and Ben, they are the best of me. One protects lives, the other saves them. I couldn't be prouder of the men they've become." Applause. I waited, hoped. Then his tone shifted. "Not every child follows in your footsteps," he said. "Some carve different paths, some drift. Not everyone is cut from the same cloth. And that's okay. You learn to accept it." The room chuckled, soft, polite, but sharp. I felt it like a blade. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I stood. The movement was small, but it rippled. Heads turned, eyes followed, but I didn't rush. I walked forward, each step a decision. I reached the edge of the stage, stopped just within the light, and held out the box. He took it slowly, eyes narrowing. I looked him in the face. My voice didn't shake. "From your biggest misread," I said. "Enjoy your retirement." Then I turned. Clicked away in heels across marble, not hurried, not shrinking. And I didn't look back. I didn't go straight back to my hotel. Instead, I sat in the back of my car, engine off, phone silent, hands gripping the steering wheel like it could hold me together. My chest was tight, but it wasn't panic, not anymore. It was something slower, like standing in cold air you knew was coming and deciding not to flinch. The ballroom was behind me, but part of me was still in that room, standing in the glow of the stage light, holding out that box. I knew he wouldn't open it immediately, Not in front of his colleagues, not with his image hanging in the air like oil on water, but he would eventually. Because my father could ignore emotion but not curiosity, especially not when it threatened his control. Inside the box was a photograph, framed in smooth black metal, just one image. Us at the state science fair when I was 12. I'd built a crude but functional neural simulation demo using gel, wires, and a repurposed game controller. I'd won first place. District-wide. He hadn't wanted to come. Said it was a waste of time. But my mom insisted. In that photo, he's standing behind me, one hand on my shoulder, pride just barely slipping through his usual restraint. It was the only time I remember him looking at me like I mattered. I had kept that photo hidden for years, tucked in a folder, bottom drawer, under tax files I rarely opened. Not out of sentimentality, but because I never knew when I'd be strong enough to look at it without feeling the ache. Now I was giving it back, not as an offering, not as a plea, as a reminder. Beneath the frame was a note, handwritten. Neat, spare letters. Just one sentence. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. I'm done now. There was nothing more to say, because what that box held wasn't just a photo. It was a mirror. A version of him he'd buried to protect the one he built, and a version of me he'd discarded without knowing what it would cost. I didn't need him to open it in front of me. I didn't need to see his reaction. I just needed to know that when he did, the silence he'd given me for 30 years would finally speak back. I stayed in that parking garage for nearly an hour. The silence was comforting. Concrete walls, no service, no expectations. Just me, alone with my thoughts and the echo of heels clicking across marble. My phone vibrated once, then again, then 6 times in a row. I didn't look. I already knew who it would be. When I finally powered it back on, there were messages, dozens. My mom, a missed call from Ben, 3 from Derek, a text from my college roommate, Lexi, who'd seen a blurry clip of me walking off stage already circulating online. But one message stood out. What was in the box? From my father. No, we need to talk. No, why did you do that? Just 5 words. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because whatever story he was spinning in his head, whatever control he thought he still had, it was already unraveling. That image, that note, it would crack the glass. Maybe not all at once, but piece by piece. By morning, the clip had gone semi-viral. No audio, just a 30-second loop of me calmly approaching the stage, handing my father the box, and walking away. The comments were split. Some people accused me of ruining a special night. Others praised it as a quiet masterclass in reclaiming dignity. But the messages that stuck with me came privately. Quiet DMS from women I didn't know. This reminds me of my dad. I wish I had your strength. I cried watching that. I didn't respond, not yet. But I read everyone. Because for the first time, someone was seeing me, not as a disappointment, not as the strange daughter who didn't fit, but as a whole person. I had walked into that ballroom unsure if I still wanted anything from him. I walked out finally knowing the answer. I didn't, and it wasn't because I'd stopped caring. It was because I'd started healing. I stayed in that parking garage for nearly an hour. The silence was comforting. Concrete walls, no service, no expectations. Just me, alone with my thoughts and the echo of heels clicking across marble. My phone vibrated once, then again, then 6 times in a row. I didn't look. I already knew who it would be. When I finally powered it back on, there were messages, dozens. My mom, a missed call from Ben, 3 from Derek, a text from my college roommate, Lexi, who'd seen a blurry clip of me walking off stage already circulating online. But one message stood out. What was in the box? From my father, no, we need to talk. No, why did you do that? Just 5 words. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because whatever story he was spinning in his head, whatever control he thought he still had, it was already unraveling. That image, that note, it would crack the glass, maybe not all at once, but piece by piece. By morning, the clip had gone semi-viral. No audio, just a 30-second loop of me calmly approaching the stage, handing my father the box, and walking away. The comments were split. Some people accused me of ruining a special night. Others praised it as a quiet masterclass in reclaiming dignity. But the messages that stuck with me came privately. Quiet DMS from women I didn't know. This reminds me of my dad. I wish I had your strength. I cried watching that. I didn't respond, not yet, but I read everyone. Because for the first time, someone was seeing me, not as a disappointment, not as the strange daughter who didn't fit, but as a whole person. I had walked into that ballroom unsure if I still wanted anything from him. I walked out finally knowing the answer. I didn't, and it wasn't because I'd stopped caring, it was because I'd started healing. I flew back to Boston the next morning. The sun was just beginning to warm the skyline as the plane descended. Light skimming glass buildings, traffic already humming below. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was escaping something. I was just returning to my life. One I had built on my own terms. Back at BioCore, the team barely missed a beat. We were in the middle of finalizing a new sensory integration system for adaptive prosthetics. The days were full, the nights even more so. But something in me had shifted. I didn't feel like I was chasing anymore. A week after I returned, my division lead knocked on my door. "Still good for the keynote?" she asked. I blinked. "Which one?" "The Women in Biotech Summit. You're our first female team lead to be invited in over a decade." I hesitated for only a second. "Yeah," I said, "I'm in." That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The speech came easily, clean, calm, honest. I started with a line I hadn't planned, one that came from somewhere deeper than I expected. Sometimes the fuel that gets us the farthest isn't validation, it's rejection. I didn't talk about titles or patents or funding rounds. I talked about what it means to grow up never hearing "I'm proud of you," and what happens when you stop waiting to. Because reinvention doesn't come in lightning bolts, it comes in moments. Quiet, decisive, yours alone. And I was finally ready to own mine. The keynote speech circulated quietly at first, through alumni groups, tech forums, women in STEM pages. Then it picked up momentum. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 1 million times. I started getting emails, not from journalists or recruiters, though those came too, but from women. Young, old, mid-career, still in school, some in tech, others in medicine, education, business. All of them carrying the same ache. "You said what I never could." That part about chasing approval, that was me. I thought I was the only one. One message stopped me cold. It was from my cousin Elena, my father's sister's daughter. We'd never been close. Barely exchanged words at family gatherings. Her email was short. "I read your story. I cried. My dad treated me the same way. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to stop shrinking." I stared at that line, "Stop shrinking." It echoed inside me like a bell. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was the same photo I'd given my father, but this time the back had been rewritten. "I didn't forget this day. I tried to, because it scared me how much I saw you. You deserved better. I'm sorry." No signature, just that. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer where I used to keep every quiet hurt. The drawer wasn't heavy anymore. It held perspective now. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive like thunder, it comes like breath. Quiet, steady, enough. And finally, I was enough, for myself,